Okay, so Unit 6. Like always, I recommend that you guys start by reading the basic sentences in the beginning of the chapter to pick up on certain words or phrases that will be used throughout the chapter. First grammatical note, which is I guess the first thing that we actually would be learning for the first time, is a concept related to the prefix yeah. And so I wrote a lot of notes here, but it's actually pretty easy to use. So if you just put yeah in front of a noun, and it's ye before nouns that begin with consonants, and then just y before words that begin with a vowel, it makes it like the thing that you're talking about owns whatever is coming up in the sentence. It's basically just like an apostrophe S in English, and there's even an example of student versus students that comes up. Actually, let's not look at this first example. I don't think it's great for this. So the example here is ye tamario beit. So the word itself is tamari, which just means student. Ye is the prefix that we're using here. So this is going to make it students whatever thing. This W is one of the definite suffixes that we learned about, and it's being attached to a noun that ends with a vowel, which is why we're adding a W here and not a U. And I'm not great at pronouncing what this is supposed to sound like, but I think it's going to be ye tamario. It sounds like a yo to me when my dad tells me how to say it. And then bait. The is coming from this W, the apostrophe S is coming from this yeah, and then the bait, the house, is what we're talking about. Addis Ababa Ketama. So this word that we're adding it to is Addis Ababa, which is the name of a city. The Y is coming before a word that begins with a vowel, so it's not Addis, it's just the Y that's getting added, which is why this E is in this parentheses. So Addis Ababa Ketama, so the city of Addis Ababa. And then after this, it's just kind of bringing up niche examples around how this prefix is used. So let's say that you want to use yeah with a word that's actually being modified. So there's some sort of adjective affecting it. In those situations, the yeah is prefixed to the modifier, not to the word itself. The example here is yek onjo seit beit. So onjo means beautiful. This K here is meant to be a symbol of a glotalized K, so like so yek onjo, and then seit is woman. Yeah is making it the beautiful girls, and then beit is house, so a house of a pretty girl. Same idea, maybe slightly different translation. Turu means good. This prefix and this suffix is adding a apostrophe S for this ye, the for this W, and we're talking about that's something that the student owns, and it's this book. Uru Tamari Mesaf, so the good student's book. If there's more than one modifier, the yeah is just prefixed to the first one only. There's another exception to this, but this is probably mostly going to be true. So the example here is a Z, which is here. Rejim is long, and then onjo is beautiful. So there are two descriptions being used here, and they're describing sate. So it actually takes you all the way to sate here to figure out, okay, what is being effective, which is this girl's supposed to be called like long, but we know that probably is more a translation of tall. Onjo is that she's beautiful, and because there's two modifiers being used, only the first one is going to get this yeah prefix. The beautiful and tall girl's book is here. Here's the book of the tall, pretty girl. So what's kind of tricky about that example is that it's using this wa suffix, which can either be a noun suffix for ownership, or it can be a feminine definite suffix. I think it's a feminine definite suffix because the translation is the tall and pretty girl's book. But even for me, that was kind of a tricky thing. The exception that's coming up is if the modifier is separated by the word inna, which just means and. So there's two adjectives affecting the main noun that we're talking about. And then if that's the case, both of those is going to have the yeah prefixed to it. So again, we have the word onjo as the main one, and then astewa, like this word means smart or clever or brilliant. I don't know the direct translation, but I just kind of remember that to be the case. Yek onjo is making it like apostrophe S for whatever's coming up, and na is end. This is another yeah, but it's prefixed to a noun that begins with a vowel, so we're not adding ye, we're just adding y. So yastewa wa. So the beautiful and clever, and then student, and it's some sort of feminine student. We're talking about her father is coming up. Like usually when there's a noun that comes after another noun, the first noun is sort of likely affecting or owning the second noun that's coming up. Not always, but that's just kind of like a general cheat. And then meta. So the father of the pretty and intelligent girl, student, came. Then it makes the note that the relational prefix yeah is not used after prepositions and prefixes. It's not going to compete with anything else. So wede is a preposition that means to, and then tamari is student, tamari W, this is making it the student. And then because it's being used after a prefix, this is saying that the possessive relationship is normally like indicated or implied by the word order. So we're normally saying like toward the student's house he went. So we just know that because it's coming after a preposition like this, that it must be the student owning some sort of house situation. But abate, so like his father's whatever, and then house. So in this situation, we're meant to assume because of this be, which has a pretty complicated meaning. This is something that's talked about in Unit 4.6 prepositions. This be is actually being used in conjunction with the suffix wust, and because they're being used together, that means inside of something. In this case, we're going to be talking about inside of the house. Because ma is in, and then abat is father. Abate is like my father, and then bait. So we know that because abat, it has a prefix, and after where there's another noun, which is bait, we're assuming that the father has some sort of possessive ownership of bait. So we don't need to say ya abat bait, which would make it father's house. We're just implying that because it already has a prefix. And then wust is just another directional word. It just means in. So in my father's house. Pulling back this little list of things. The last note that the book makes is that yeah can be prefixed to all the independent pronouns. So these are actually way easier than what it's like looking like. You can just say like yene is mine, yanta is you males, yesu is his, and you can just keep going. And these are actually very commonly used all the time. And I think they're actually very helpful for making things simpler, because in Amadic, what it's basically going to show you here is that there are two ways to sort of indicate possession. So you can use noun suffix pronouns, which are talked about in 4.4. I don't know why it's talking about section 4.4. It's actually mentioned in unit 4.1, these noun suffix pronouns, because look, you have this e attached to the end of the word and it makes it my book. You have this u attached to the end of the word, which makes it his book, or this can be the book, which I think the book we'll talk about later. Misaf achin. Achin is a suffix for our, so it's our book. So you can say possessive things using this system, or you can do it using prefix to independent pronouns. And these are the list of independent pronouns. They're in unit 3. You just add a in front of everything, or just a y if it begins with a vowel, and it just becomes like yene, yanta, yanchi. I'm skipping the polite stuff. Yersu or yesu, swa, yeswa. I'm gonna skip the polite one again. Yenya, yenanta, yenesu or yenersu. And I think it's way easier to use this in front of whatever noun you're talking about than use these suffixes, just for me personally. So that's why I definitely like them. The book talks about that there is a slight difference in meaning, even though they're virtually exactly the same. The second version has a little bit more like emphasis onto it, because you're going out of your way to use the independent pronoun rather than just using like a quick little suffix attached to the end of the word. And then the last thing the book mentions is that there are like 3 ways to be saying the American embassy, which is part of the reason Amadic gets confusing, is because there's a lot of ways of saying the same thing and they can kind of add up. Like America embassy, which is like, again, this Y for ownership is being attached to America embassy, so the embassy of America. American embassy, this is basically just the direct English version. American embassy is some sort of fusion of the two. And all my 6.1 notes are basically some sort of condensed version, like just as a prefix meaning pertaining to. It's before consonants and Y before vowels. And the example is Tamaria students and Addis Ababa's thing. Possessor rule, where if there's 2 modifiers, it just goes in front of the first one. If there are 2 modifiers separated by an and, the goes on both. It's not used after other prepositions and prefixes. Ownership is just assumed by whoever comes after that preposition. And then can be prefix independent pronouns, and I think it's actually easier to use these. So infinitives. Luckily in lesson 1 we actually talked about infinitives before, so I'd rewatch that video for more in-depth practice with this, but I'll stick to this little slide here. Infinitives just mean to blank something, and in Amadic you can have like to want something. You can have states of being that you can be, like to be warm, or actions like to go. So the example here is kifil is class. Kifelu can either be his class or the class, because we don't see anyone else being mentioned. Maybe it could have been implied by the verb that comes up at the end, but from this verb we're going to find out that we're not talking about a guy, so it's the classroom. This and means it's the direct object, so this classroom, the classroom, is being the recipient of some sort of action. Mayet means to see, and then ifelegallo means I want, which is kind of what I was trying to show here. Actually, I even think that mayet ifelegallo means I want to see. I was trying to show these sort of examples early on, but the meaning makes it I'd like to see the room. This word ifelegallo we talked about from imperfective, which is I think in lesson, is talked about a little bit in lesson 1 and more so in lesson 2 from the channel if you want to refresh on those, but I'll be covering it a little bit again here. But I think it's not the best at the textbook is using a grammatical situation here that you haven't seen before, but stuff like that happens in this textbook a lot. Infinitives always have some sort of ME beginning, or they just say M ending, or just MA is how I say it. Like, infinitives can also be used as a verbal noun. So I'm actually not super great of understanding what a verbal noun is. Basically, it's a verb that looks like a verb but actually functions as a noun. So the example I could find is he is building, which is a verb, a building. Building is like a noun. I can't really figure out how to directly translate that usage into Amadic, but I would just say, like, if you see a infinitive and it has what it's going to say here, prefixes and suffixes attached to it that are normally attached to nouns, I would just translate that infinitive to the best of your ability into some sort of ing version of that word, and then just sort of make up something that might work. So the example, they only give one example, which is kind of unfortunate. I wish they gave more. But mahid is the infinitive. That means to go. So this ka is actually being combined with this word befit, and that's something we're going to be learning later. But ka and before word and befit after, this preposition and postposition, it makes it before something. Mahid is the infinitive, which means to go. Then this you is meant to be implying third person masculine or he, him ownership. I know it's also sometimes makes it the, like here it makes it the room, but because we're working with a verbal noun, I'm pretty sure anytime we see this you, it's going to be implying his situation. And like I said before, we just want to try and make mahid, which means to go, into some sort of ing version, so going. So it'll translate to something like before his going. These verbal noun usages of infinitives are actually kind of common. I'm sorry that the textbook doesn't have more examples. You know, if you hear it, maybe, hopefully this will help you be aware of it. Imperfective. So the imperfective basically means present or future action. There's a set of prefixes and suffixes used with certain words, and it will just turn it into, you know, one of the 7 subjects that we normally talk about, and then it'll make them do it in the future, or in some interpretation of a present tense. So we talked about these before. Basically, you want to get the root of a word from the infinitive. So this word mefellig, the root would just be fellig. And there's more on this a little bit later in the chapter, what that overcomplicates it, but we'll address that in the future. But I'll just take this fellig and then plug it in where you see these dashes, and then that'll give you the word. I mentioned this before, I think in lesson 2 also, but second person feminine is cursed. Like, if the last consonant of the word ends in one of these consonants, so a T, a D, a glottalized T, an S, a Z, an N, or an L, it'll be transformed into a different ending. So this T will become a CH, the D will become a J, the glottalized T will become glottalized T and S will become a glottalized CH, S will become CH, Z will become ZH, N will become yin kind of thing, it's tough for me to pronounce, and then L will become a Y. Also, occasionally, the last consonant that's been modified, it will have an iya come like right after it. Sometimes it's used and sometimes it's not. That's what these 2 lists are meant to be showing. This list is the same as this list, but it's using the iya version. So I think maybe walking through will be helpful. And this is something that we've also talked about in lesson 2. So mekfet is to open. Because it ends with a T, it's going to be turned into a CH. Tekef, and then alish is the normal prefix. Alish is the normal suffix that we can see here. Tekef chalish is you female will open. You can also say tekef ch ialish. So this is using the iya right before the alish. So tekef chialish can also be used, and it has the exact same meaning. Some speakers use only the consonant preceding the EY, and then some people will keep the EA in front of the alish. Tehijalish is based off of mahid. Heed ends with a D, so it's going to be transformed into a J. Again, you add a T and then the normal alish ending. Tehijalish is you female will go here. Tehijalish is saying it with the Ia. Memtat is like to come. This glottalized T or S will be replaced by CH. And then you add the T and alish. Temechalish is you female will come. Temechialish is also you female will come. Madres is to cause to arrive, and that S ending of madres is going to become a CH. So ta'adershalish is like you female will cause something to arrive. Tedershialish is you female will cause to arrive also. Megzat is to buy. It doesn't really end with a Z exactly. Megzat, I think it kind of ends with an A, but because the last consonant is a Z, it's being affected. So the Z is going to become a J. Tigejalish is you female will buy. Tigejalish is you female will buy also. So this mask thing is meant to be the masculine version. Like if you're saying it to you, male will do something. Like if you look at this ti and this alle suffix, it matches up with the second person version of ti and alle, and these all will just mean like you male will do something. All this is saying something I've said before, that all these suffixes have some sort of I or ti, ye, ti. If the verb begins with an A, you don't have to worry about this I. You just remove it and it'll just become like ta, ya, ta. This keeps the in actually. Ta, ya. Which is what it's trying to say with aukallo. It's not like aukallo, it's just aukallo because the A is going to overpower the I, and that'll mean I know. It's not ye adaral, like for mader. It'll just be yadaral, and he spends the night. This is showing that malat is an irregular, and I'll just memorize this list. It's actually pretty important. And again, you can go back to lesson 2 to look at a bunch of imperfective practice. So because this video is getting so long, I'm going to split it up into parts. So I'll see you guys in the next video.